episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you. And I feel like right off the bat, you guys need to know that I just woke up from a 2-hour nap. I'm drinking a Diet Coke. I'm wearing a Harry Styles Christmas t-shirt. And I did just finish watching Taylor's London Night One surprise songs. And now I'm contemplating hopping on a flight because what the hell was that? I need to be there. I also am on Long Island. So if you're watching on video, you can probably tell that for the first time since the beginning of PBG, I'm at my mom's house. The big obvious sign is that there's a giant Irish cross behind me. That's how you know I'm not in the city. I've been talking about this on my Instagram and I'm sure I mentioned it on here, but I'm going to be spending this summer out here because I work remotely and I can and I want to. And that's why. But so you'll see like a different background this summer. And I was just thinking about it because I was like, at what point does a podcast season end? We're getting close to like 50 episodes of the show, which is really crazy. I don't want to take a break though for the summer because I love doing this, but the nature of my summer, specifically July, there may be times where like, maybe I'll throw up an author interview instead of an episode because I didn't have time to record. But I feel like that probably won't happen. I'm just like getting in my head about it. But I wanted to let you know that because now we're officially in PBG summer mode, which means though that my reading picks up so much in the summer. We are already seeing that in June. I'm already like 20 books into June. So get ready because I'm going to have so much to discuss. This is not a wrap-up episode though, but I am talking about 3 books that I read and loved recently, actually in June, because I've just been reading so much, like flying through books, loving books, which is the best feeling. I'm currently knocking on wood because I don't want to jinx that, although I currently am reading the Empire of Storms / Tower of Dawn fandom. I guess it is a fandom read. Tandem read, which this is books like 5 and 5.5 or 6 of the Throne of Glass series. I'm basically, the first time I read it, this wasn't a thing, and I read Empire of Storms, and then that is like the normal book in the series, but one of the main characters is on a bit of a side quest, and Tower of Dawn is not even a shorter book, it's still a long book about that side quest. And the first time I read it, I just like hated, because also the Empire of Storms ending is really crazy. I still remember that ending from the first time I read it 5 years ago. And I hated just like all of a sudden being on this side quest before getting into the one after that is Kingdom of Ash, the final book in the series. So people have since put together this tandem read where you basically read them both at once, which just makes so much more sense for it to be in one book. And feels like you're getting through it quicker. But a girl that I went to high school with actually sent me a Kindle file of it, which is really helpful because I know people will have like, if you Google it, you can see people laid the chapters out, which I'm curious how they came up with that. I'm not questioning it. I'm just reading what they're telling me to read. But it's so nice having it all in one Kindle file. When I started it, and I'm a fast reader, but my Kindle time for this book was 18 hours. And I was just like, oh my God, I don't know why it feels so daunting. And I still am only at this point, I have 16 and a half hours left of it. And I'm just like, oh, I feel like I'm in like a bit of a slog trying to get through this. And I'm hoping it doesn't make me feel slumpy. But I know the action for like Empire of Storms will pick up. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, we have a book club, which is happening this week. Our book club pick for June is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. I have read it. I'm actually recording the book club episode right when I finish recording this one. I liked it. I gave it 4 stars, but I have a lot to say. So if you have already read it, it's actually on Kindle Unlimited, and I've forgotten to say that on every single episode this month. But if you quickly want to join in and read it, it's a very quick read. The episode will be out this Thursday, June 27th, where I talk about every single thing that happened in the book. So it will be full of spoilers and I give all of my thoughts on it. And I'm excited also because on that episode will be announcing the July book club pick. And I'm excited to announce it because I just always get excited to announce things. It's fun to announce things. Okay, let's get into, this was originally going to be a listener's choice episode, which when I started the show, I was like, I'll do these monthly, but no one submitted any books they wanted me to talk about, which is totally fine. Except one thing that was submitted was a topic for me to talk about, which is what I thought about the latest season of Bridgerton. And honestly, this is just going to end up being like a shows I'm watching right now section because I don't have that much to say about Bridgerton. I do very quickly want to say, though, that the new Gracie Abrams album came out today, the day I'm recording this, and I took the train from the city to Long Island this morning and like obsessed with it. I couldn't stop listening to it. I like couldn't really get into her first album, but this one is just so fucking good. So I am in this moment obsessed with that album. Bridgerton. So my thoughts about this season have led me to have thoughts about how I felt about the show always. And I think I gaslit myself into believing that I really loved this show because I did really okay. So basically my history with the Bridgerton as a whole though is that I saw that the books were coming out and I read actually when I had COVID for the first time in 2020, I read the first book. It was sent to me because they had done like the Netflix cover tie-in and I was sitting in my room very sick and I was like, okay, I'm going to read this and I loved it. So I read the first book and then I watched the first season of the show and I was happy. I really liked it. I didn't have any crazy thoughts. And then I finished all of the books. I'm pretty sure before season 2, but like I definitely had read Anthony's books before I saw season 2. And I still liked season 2 more. Season 3 of the show is my least favorite. I still liked season 2 because like they're like India is not far enough away. Like what was the line for that of season 3? I burn for you. And then that giant speech Anthony gives. And then that scene outside where they do it. It was crazy. Anthony and Kate I'm talking about. But my issue with season 2, and it really, really annoyed me, was that I hated how, also Bridgerton spoilers, there you go. I hated how far along Anthony and Edwina got. Like, I really didn't like that because they were sisters, and in the book, it's resolved much quicker. But other than that, like, I didn't really have any major gripes with it. This, going into season 3, I knew I probably wasn't going to be as obsessed because, like, when I watched the first seasons, I was obsessed with Daphne and Simon, and then I was obsessed with Kate and Anthony. Like, I love Anthony so much. And then, but I was never obsessed with Colin and Penelope. Like, Friends to Lovers is not my favorite trope. Their book was not my favorite book. So I kind of knew already, but then I was like, well, it's Bridgerton. Like, I'll still enjoy it. And I just was bored, honestly. Like, I watched the first 4 episodes in one day. I hate the way they broke it up, though, because I was like, over it. Like 1 month, it's just stupid. Like give it to me all at once or give it to me weekly. Like I don't like this like 4 and then a giant break and then 4 because I wasn't like crazy obsessed with it that I was like, oh, I can't wait to watch it. Like the only reason I was rushing to watch part 2 is because I didn't want to see everything spoiled. But then I like just didn't really have much time. So I finished watching it. Like I watched those 4 episodes over the course of the week, which is just not how I usually watch Bridgerton. And it's because in part 2, I honestly was bored. Like I really just didn't. I knew Colin and Penelope were still going to end up together. I just like I don't have an exact reasoning for why. I was just bored. Like I really wasn't enjoying it as much as I enjoyed the rest of the show. And I know that like I've seen the movement online. I know other people feel like that. But I know people also loved it. And like I'm glad for the people that loved it. Like I'm kind of jealous. I just didn't get that like and like well first of all I want to say like I love Penelope and I loved like watching her journey and her not wanting to give up her writing and like in the book that comes across even stronger and like I love Penelope. Like I wished I could have loved this, but like their sex scene just like I found really cringy. Like I it didn't do it for me. Which is like took out kind of the fun of Bridgerton. But then I don't know, I was just bored. I did like though all the stuff that they did with Cressida. Like I watched a few of the episodes. I watched 1, 2, and 3 with my mom. And all 3 times we watched them, like we couldn't go into the next episode because like we had something. But the endings though with Cressida, I would be like, oh, okay, maybe we should watch it. Like I liked that invented plot line. I also like I talked about this on my Instagram. Someone asked me what I thought of the first 4, and I was like, my favorite part was Francesca. And spoilers right now for Francesca's story. So that is your warning. You can like skip ahead a few minutes into the show if you don't want to hear it. But Francesca's book was my favorite book. And in her book, we don't get to see her and John meet. So I really loved that. But I just feel like in part 2, I didn't love like what they like when they get married and she like then like doesn't like him like because in the books she is like so in it for John and major spoiler coming right now. In the books, John dies. Like the opening of the book is like them hanging out with his cousin Michael, who is a guy, not Michaela, like it was in the show, and he dies. And then she grieves John for 6 years. And then she decides that she wants to have a child. And so she needs to get married again. And Michael, the cousin, starts helping her find a child. And then they fall in love. And like they made Michael Michaela, which whatever. Like now Francesca's gay. Cool. Happy Pride. That part doesn't really bother me. The only like slight disappointment that I had was because that is my favorite story. Francesca is my favorite Bridgerton, period. Michael is like my second favorite. Like Anthony is my favorite Bridgerton like guy in the Bridgerton universe, and then Michael is my second favorite. And like selfishly, I just wanted to see who they were going to cast for him. Like I wanted to see like how hot Michael is going to be. But whatever. Now Michael is Michaela. That's fine. I'm just curious like what they're going to change. And I know that one will just bother me more because I loved that book so much. But now I'm like the showrunner said she might just even change everything with Eloise, which honestly fine because I didn't like Eloise's book. But I don't know. I'm just like, I had to separate them from the books in my head. And I usually don't really watch book to show or TV adaptations for this reason. But like even the costumes, like my mom kept commenting on things and I was like, this is not historically accurate. And like it never was, but it used to be more historically accurate. And I don't know. I just like, I feel like it lost the magic a little bit this season. And that's all I have to say. I felt relieved, honestly, when I was done with it. Because I was like, I felt like a chore getting through the second half, which like no one ever wants that. I am watching Love Island. I'm watching UK. I know everyone's saying USA is better this season. I'm enjoying UK. I don't have it in me to watch two at once. Like the show is on every single day of the week. I just can't. And I'm a UK girly. So that's that. And then House of the Dragon, at the time of recording, only one episode has come out. I'm happy it's back. I liked being back in that world. I forgot so much. So like, thank God my TikTok algorithm has been on these fan edits. I saw the dragon. They put this dragon up on the Empire State Building. It went up on Father's Day, like during the day, and I was on Long Island. And then that night I went back to the city and I exited Penn Station, and the Empire State Building is right there. And I saw it and it was lit up green. And I got off the train at like 9:40. So it was still green and the show started at 9. And first thought was, I thought the dragon would be bigger. And now I'm like, is this dragon supposed to be to scale? Because haven't seen a dragon in real life now. Not that scary. Like still really big, but like I thought it would be bigger. And obviously I was thinking about Fourth Wing when I saw it. And it's still up. I also saw it in the daytime. And now it kind of like, I think it's like deflating a little bit because like it just looks like weird up there. But this is cool. And I didn't post about this, but I posted the dragon on my Instagram story. And then my friend messaged me because she lives near the Empire State Building. So she was like, oh my God, I need to go up to my roof and see it lit up now because she saw it during the day. And so we're talking about the dragon and we're like, oh my, like great marketing, whatever, which it is. And like, I love a fun marketing gimmick. Living in New York, we got these fun things. So it was like, it was cool. Just look up and see a dragon, right? Especially because I'm into the show and the world. So I'm in my Uber and I'm driving down the east. What is that road? The FDR, which is a highway on the east side of Manhattan. And I'm like, let me just like get one last glance at the dragon. And I turn around and it is just turning to 10 on the dot. And the Empire State Building changed from green to red. And I had not seen the episode. So I was like, oh my God, is this to do with the episode? And I haven't seen anyone saying, and like, this isn't a spoiler because like, you know, it's a war, like things happen. So I was like, oh, did something just happen that made like, they're really team black though, but the color is red. Did they just like win a battle or something? And then now after seeing the episode, something big does happen at the end of the episode. So I was like, right when that happened, the Empire State Building switched to red, like to signify them winning something. So I don't know why no one was talking about that, but I thought that was really freaking cool. And that is what I have been up to lately. Let's talk about books. The first book is Real Americans by Rachel Khong, and I loved this. And I'm going to say this honestly, for the first two books I'm talking about are books that I was not sure if I would like. And a lot of the times, like there's always books you're like, I'm not sure if this is for me. And I would say like more often than not, I don't like them because I'm pretty good at gauging what I will and won't like. But the reason why I still pick those books up is because sometimes I love the book. And that's what happened with the two that I'm talking about on this episode. And that is what happened with this book, Real Americans. And I think why for both the other one there was a different reason, but for Real Americans why I was nervous I wouldn't like it is because it just seemed so literary, which like doesn't always work for me. But I freaking love this book and I like don't really know how to talk about it without spoiling. So basically the headline of this book is that it is like a wild ride about family and genetics and race and money and like what all of that means. And it's like rich people behaving badly and science and love and like paternity issues. That is the book at a glance. And I don't want to spoil too much, but the way that it's written is so beautiful and the story is so fucking crazy. So the book opens up in like like you in this book they celebrate New Year's going into 2000. So I had also like literally right before this I read Summer Fridays, which takes place right before 9/11. That takes place in 99. And then this one takes place also right before 9/11, and like obviously 9/11 came up in it, and I because it takes place in New York. And I was like, what the heck? Like that was just a weird coincidence to read like two books that mention 9/11 at once. Also because like I guess it stands out to me when a book mentions 9/11. And I talked about my, like, I just still feel weird reading about 9/11, but I was like, okay, we're like 20 plus years out. Like, I guess it's not that weird. But it was just a weird coincidence back to back. Two 9/11 books. So our main girl is Lily, and she lives in New York, and she is like, she's poor. Like she works as an unpaid intern. I'm pretty sure she goes to NYU, and she's got like this media company. She's some type of like graphic designer. And it was also interesting to read about graphic designers in the year 2000. Like I'm not a graphic designer, but my best friends from my first job were graphic designers, and I used to sit next to them. So like I know what their job looks like. And I was like, this does not look like that. But so she is like unpaid intern at this media company. But she like it's a great internship and she's hoping that she can work there one day. And she goes to the like a company holiday party, and she meets this guy Matthew, and he is the nephew of her like kind of sucky boss. And they win a raffle for a flat screen TV. And this was funny because I remember when flat screen TVs came out, and it was such a big deal of like this person in the neighborhood got a flat screen TV. And like when we got our first flat screen TV in our house, now you can buy them for so cheap. But it was just like, this is the time when they were coming out, and it was such a big deal to have a flat screen TV. And she wins, or he wins one, and he gives it to her. So then they're like, let's get out of here. So then they go like to dinner or something, and then they fly to Paris. So immediately I'm like, I want to marry this man. And you learn that he's very wealthy, but you don't know right away at how wealthy he is. So he has his own like condo in the West Village that she basically ends up moving into. They spend all their time there rather than in her like shitty apartment with her roommate. And they really have like this whirlwind relationship, and they really hit it off. And like I really liked reading about the two of them. So then you know, though, that she is the daughter of Chinese immigrants, and both of her parents worked in science at like this lab in Florida where she grew up. She's from Florida. I can't freaking say anything because I don't want to spoil him, but there's stuff going on with that. And then you end up learning about her parents and their time in China, and then how they like came over to China and what it was like for them when they first came over. And I found all of that to be really interesting. I don't know too much about Chinese history, so I learned a lot when I was reading those parts. But the book then, like part one ends, like we're following Lily and Matt, and it's this like interesting literary fiction romance about like she's poor and he's rich, but like he's so sweet to her. And I was like, I want him. And then it goes to part two, and it's like 20 years later, and we're in this perspective of Nicholas, their son. And Nicholas doesn't know who his father is. And then we follow him on this journey that like I really can't say anything about. But That's honestly all I can say because I don't want to spoil any of it because there are twists that I was like freaking out. And like what really made this stand out to me was the way that it's written is just so beautiful. The way that the story is told is so well done. And the story itself is so insane. Like there are giant things that I'm not mentioning that I think you can tell I'm struggling not to mention because I just want to like be like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. But I don't want to spoil it for you because like the twists in this book, I was freaking out and I've never seen a literary fiction pull off these giant twists in this way. And like it almost felt suspenseful at points and it was just so good. I really enjoyed this. I flew through it. I was a little bit worried that like the writing at first, I mean the whole thing at first really worried me, but I loved it. I loved it so much. I gave it 4 stars. That is Real Americans by Rachel Khong. The next book is The Ministry of Time by Kalianne Bradley. And I freaking loved this book. So I I will tell you why I picked this one up as I started talking about it, but I was nervous because it's like sci-fi dystopia, which is like not really me, but there's a historical element to it that is what drew me in. And the way that the book is described, it reminded me of the TV show Loki, which by the way, did season 2 ever come out? If it did, I didn't watch it. I've also been like, maybe it's time I do a Marvel rewatch, like just up into Endgame. I don't know. Stay tuned. I might do that this summer. I might be crazy and do a Marvel rewatch. I feel like summer seems like a good time to do that. Anyway, I was so happily surprised by how much I like this. I read it in one sitting. I couldn't put it down. Once again, I'm going to say it is so beautifully written. There is a passage about forgiveness and time. It's the last paragraph of the book that I'm just going to read it because I took a photo and highlighted it in my photo editing app and posted it to my Instagram because it just hit me so hard. And I loved it. So where is that? Okay. So the last paragraph of this book, this is not a spoiler. Forgiveness, which takes you back to the person you were and lets you reset them. Hope, which exists in a future in which you are new. Forgiveness and hope are miracles. They let you change your life. They are time travel. Oh, I love that so fucking much. Okay, so in this book, our main girl, we never learn her name, which I realized when I was writing my review. So we're going to call her Bridge because in this world, in like this dystopian sci-fi, I was going to say America, but it does not take place in America. It takes place in England. She works for the Ministry of Time Travel as a bridge. So time travel exists. They figured it out, and she works for the government. And they are doing this experiment where they went back to 5 different points in time and brought someone back who was on the verge of death. So because they were about to die, it's like there's no like butterfly effect. Like there's no ripples through time of the consequences of them not being there anymore. So there's someone from medieval times in England, a woman. There's a woman from the French Revolution. There's a guy from kind of around the times of like the 1600s. He was like a soldier guy. There's a guy from World War One, like he died at the Somme, and that's where they grabbed him. And then I would say our main guy is this guy, Commodore. Is that correct? Commander Graham Gore, who is from 1847, and he's from Victorian times, and he was on this Arctic expedition, and his expedition, it actually is a real expedition, and this guy is a real guy, which I read in the author's note, which I thought was so fucking cool. She like found this real guy in history and decided to like bring him to life and like spin this story for him. But he was a real guy who by all accounts seemed like a good-looking good guy. She says in the author's note, people said he was good-looking. So that's fun. But he is on this Arctic expedition and like he dies before everyone else, but basically like everyone died. And it was one of like these great mysteries of like what went wrong on this expedition and like why did nobody survive? Why didn't they like make it back? So she's a bridge, and like as a bridge, her job is to help these people acclimate to the current day, but also monitor them. So she has to report on, and her guy that she's assigned is Graham, the guy from Victorian times, and they nickname themselves the year that they're from. So his nickname is 1847, but I'm going to call him Graham. So they're living together in like this house funded from the government, and she's introducing him to the modern time. And that's what drew me to the book. That they took 5 people from history and brought them to the current day. I was like, that sounds so cool. And that's really what the first half of the book is. We watch them get acclimated to the current timeline. One specific thing that like I keep thinking about that Graham says is like, when she shows him Spotify, he's so obsessed with it because he's like, I wasn't in his time, you couldn't just listen to music whenever you wanted to because it was a whole production to get music. So he's obsessed with like being able to just press play on something. And I was like, oh my God, like we take for granted that we can just listen to music whenever we want. But it was really fun to see him kind of see all of them really, because like they all hang out and then they all have these meetings. So you see all of them, but Graham is really the main time traveler that we're following. Figure out like learn modern things. Like it was really fun. And then he teaches her a lot about his time, and they have a relation. They have become close friends, and then something happened. But then the second half of the book is like a time travel thriller. So things start going a bit weird, and people that work in the ministry start disappearing, and all of this stuff starts going on. And like it literally becomes like this thrilling adventure where like I can't say anything, but it's like it felt like a thriller, like a thriller movie, I would say. Like, which is, I think a thriller movie is different than a book thriller, in my head at least. So I could picture this whole thing as a show or a movie. I think it would probably do very well. But then it got so exciting. Like I was like, okay, I know these time travelers, and I'm like connected to them. The one from World War I specifically was just like broke my heart a little bit, but now they're in danger and there's these suspicious people and things are happening, and it got very exciting. And then I like really couldn't put it down. It is such a fun wild ride. It is so unique. And the author's note, she said that she just like started this story just to like tell her friends a crazy story, and then they were like, this is a book, which I think that's so fun that she just like spun this up to be like, oh, imagine this. And then I guess that's what all books are like, actually. I don't know, but that's what she said in the author's note. I loved it. It was just like so different from anything I've ever read. I gave it 4 stars. That is The Ministry of Time by Kalianne Bradley. The final book is one I knew I would be obsessed with, and I was fucking obsessed with it. It's a K-Rod What 5-star read. It is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, and I'm just going to say it right now. This book comes out on July 9th, so I'm not spoiling. I'm teasing it because I just couldn't wait to talk about it. I wanted to make sure it gets its own moment. I read it on my Kindle, and I already am like, I cannot wait to get a physical copy because it is going on my favorite shelf. I love this book so much. So when I first found out that Kate had a new book coming, which by the way, she's one of my all-time favorite authors. Her books, The Alice Network was one of the first historical fiction books I've ever read. So that holds a very special place in my heart. But then The Rose Code, I feel like you guys know, is one of my all-time favorite books. Just like love it so, so much. And this is up there with my favorite Kate Quinn books, like probably all-time favorite historical fiction. It's just so good. So when I first heard that Kate was working on a new book, I assumed it was going to be like McCarthyism Red Scare, which if you don't know what that is, this is in the early 1950s when World War II had ended, and now like we're in the beginning of the Cold War with Russia. And this Senator McCarthy, also like kind of Oppenheimer vibes, I guess, if you saw the movie, but he is like going around calling everyone a communist, like, and people's lives are being destroyed by this, by the insinuation. And in some cases it was like people like just signed a leaflet when they were like very young, and then they're like losing their jobs. It was a whole thing like that, like Hollywood was full of communists. Like it's a whole thing. You can Google it if you're interested in learning about more. But when I thought that that's what it was going to be about, I was like already so intrigued. Like that is a huge historical topic that I've read a few historical fiction novels about. Coming to mind immediately is Red Letter Days. I can't remember the name of the author, but I was like, Kate Quinn doing that, like so excited. That is in this book though, but there is so much fucking history in this book. She covers like everything. And it also made me and the book takes place over a 4-year span from like 50 to 54. And it also made me realize, like, obviously I know this, but like it made me think about how much history is always happening at once. Like, think about everything happening right now, even down to pop culture, like the Eras Tour. But then, like, how, like, things I talked about in this episode, like House of the Dragon, there's a dragon. Like, Boons, if someone were to be writing a historical thing about this, but then also like, okay, we're going into an election year, like there's multiple wars happening, like there's just so much history happening all the time. And usually in a historical fiction novel, they focus on one event of history, but this one, she covers it all and she does it in such an amazing way. So I guess I would say our main girl is Grace, but there's really like 7 main characters. So the way that the book is structured is really important for the story. It's not in chapters. It's split up into, I think it's 9 parts. And it opens up with us meeting the woman Grace. So she is new to Washington, D.C., where this book takes place, and she needs somewhere to stay. So she goes to the Briarwood boarding house and she gets a room there, and she gets like this small attic room, and it's like so small. And she takes it right away. And she then starts these like Thursday supper clubs where, because like all the women that live in this boarding house up until now are just not even just roommates. Like they're not friends. They don't really interact if they don't have to. But because Grace starts these Thursday night dinners, they all become friends and we all get to know each other. So the book is split up into a part for each woman. And I read this on my Kindle, and it took me 45 minutes to an hour to read each part. So that just, and I'm like, and that's like a long time for, like, I'm a fast reader. So it just shows you how big of a section each woman got. And it was so cool because you would like learn everything about them in their section, but in the other sections, you were seeing them through the eyes of everybody else. Like, everyone still pops up in the books. So I'm gonna, I guess, run through some of the women in the book. So there's Grace, who I mentioned, who is kind of like the matriarch of all of the women living in the house. Although there is an actual woman who owns the house, and like she sucks, but her 2 young kids live in the house, and Grace and all of the Briarwood women take them under their wing, and we get to learn a bit about growing up in the 50s. And in the author's note, Kate Quinn says, like, we look at it as like an idealized time to be a kid, but like it really wasn't. Like, there was a lot going on. But so my favorite girl was Nora, who is Irish American from a cop family. She falls in love with a mobster. She works at the National Archives. And in her section, we're really learning about like the mob, what it means to be like Irish American during this time. And at the National Archives, at this point, only the Bill of Rights is housed in like the lobby, and they're working on bringing the Constitution and was it the Declaration? I don't know, another important document into the archives, which this was a real thing that happened. She was my favorite. And then there is Fliss, who is English, and she used to be a nurse. Her husband is an American, and he works as an army doctor. And the Korean War starts during this, when as the book opens up, and he like has to stay on. And now he is away in Korea, and she's back in DC with their like 1-year-old child. And I realized like I've never read historical fiction that even mentions the Korean War, and like one of my grandfathers fought in the Korean War, and I was like, oh, this is like kind of cool to get to learn more about it. And also during her chapters, because she used to be a nurse, we learn about how the birth control pill came to be, because that was happening at this time too. Then there's a woman named B who played baseball in like the World War II Women's Baseball League, so like a league of their own. And we meet her when those leagues are shutting down, and it really was like what happens after a league of their own. Like, that part was so much fun. Then there's a woman, I think her name was Rika, and she immigrated to the US during World War II because she is she's German. I'm not sure if she was Jewish, but she was an artist. So like she was on the Nazi shit list. And we see like what happens to these people when they escaped. And it's years, like the war's over now. Like, how were they treated? Then there's this woman, Arlene, who works for the House Un-American Committee. So like for Senator McCarthy, and she's all into like the Red Scare and McCarthyism. Then there's this woman, Claire, who works for this senator that I can't remember her name, which is like, I need to memorize it because it was a woman senator, and she was the only senator to stand up to McCarthy and give this speech about actually what he was doing. This witch hunt he was on was the un-American thing. And they went on to say that if a man had given that speech, he would have been the next president, but because it was a woman, she wasn't. And that's literally like barely scratching the surface. Like, so much goes on. The way that the story is told, though, I felt like I knew these women so well. I felt like I lived in the house with them, and I loved when you would like catch glimpses of like someone like Fliss. Like, her section is like in the middle of the book, so you get glimpses of her in everyone else's section, and she seems like this perfect put together, like when we think about the 50s housewife, it is Fliss. And then we get to her section and you get to learn about what's actually going on, because we see her how other people perceive her for so long, and then you're fully in her point of view. And it was just like you got to know these characters in such a different way because you're also seeing how other people perceive them. But also, as the book opens, we find out that on Thanksgiving Day of 1954, there's a body in the house. So as every section starts, we have a little chapter from the perspective of the house itself. And I loved this so much. I think because I am so sentimental towards my childhood house that I grew up in, that my family no longer lives in. Like, I literally could cry right now thinking about how I can never go back there. And just to like watch the house talk about how much it loved these women and how they turned the house into a home, while also narrating like there's a body, the police are here, and the house, we don't know what happened until the end of the book, obviously. And you get so sucked into the women's stories that you would forget there's a body and that someone dies. And then you would like be back with the house and you're like, oh, right. Like, trying to figure out the mystery. And then that whole thing, like, I'm barely touching anything on that because I'm not spoiling it, but like the mystery and all was just so good. Like, it is just like classic Kate Quinn. It is so historically rich. It's so well written. I felt like I learned so much, but I also felt like I was in the book with the women. I felt like I lived there. I loved it so much. Like I said, I gave it 5 stars. And I got to interview Kate, and talking to her about this book made me love it even more. That interview will be out on July 11th, so keep an eye out for that. But pre-order this one, add it to your list. That is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. Let's get into some mood reads. So Samantha is in the mood for a book that deals with grief, and I would say The Two Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. It's also like a romance, but it really is about, so the girl, Lydia Bird, her fiance or her husband dies, and it's like years later and she's still grieving, and it just really makes you think about your life after loss. And I remember I was reading it around like the 5-year anniversary of my aunt's death, and I was thinking about like what our lives would have been like if that tragedy hadn't happened, but also what we wouldn't have in our lives now if it didn't. Like, just lots of questions. Also, I always say The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Next, Rach N. Reads from Bookstagram is in the mood for early summer cottage vacation vibes. And for that, I say Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Mahagan. I've talked about this book on the show before. This is a 5-star romance. It's about a woman who owns a house in like upstate. I think it all takes place over the summer. And they're adapting her book into a movie, and they're filming it at her house, and she falls in love with the very famous Hollywood actor that is starring in it. So much fun. I cried, loved it. Then Laurel is in the mood for, I love this, 60s and 70s historical fiction, Vietnam, student unrest, music, you know the vibes. And I am saying Summer of 69 by Ellen Hildebrand. I've only read 2 of her books, this one and 28 Summers. This was the first one I read. I loved this book so much. I remember I read the first half of it on the beach, and like people were playing classic rock, and I felt like I was in the book. But then like going to work the next day and like being on my lunch break and being like, I cannot wait to keep reading it. It is about, as you might guess, the summer of 69. So much happens that summer, like that I didn't even realize. And this one holds a special place in my heart because my grandma had also read it, and before she died, we would talk about it, and she would like tell me about like her remembering things that happened in the book. She reread this one a lot. I know she really loved it. So I really love that book. That is our show. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever you on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Carrot. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. And I will see you on Thursday for book club.